We've got the Nouvolo Steck 2.0 here. I'll give you the rundown, do an initial air-cooled build, and we'll see how it stacks up. Welcome to Machines and More. Today we'll be taking our first look at another revised sandwich style case this year, the mini-itx small form factor Nouvolo Steck 2.0. This is a modular case and we'll start with the basic setup first. And in future content, we'll check out the utility of the top hats that one can option on for use with an EIO or to just expand the capability of the case. Big thanks to Nouvolo for providing the test unit today. Full disclosure, this video is not sponsored by them, but we do have a sponsor for this video. And before we get into the case, just a quick word from them. Today's video is brought to you by the FlexiSpot Canna Pro Bamboo Standing Desk and the FlexiSpot Ergonomic Chair Pro. The Canna Pro Standing Desk features a height adjustable work surface, so whether you're sitting or changing things up by standing, it's easy to accomplish. This work surface is made out of laminated bamboo, and I've been using this one for about a year now, and the surface still looks new. It's got a durable satin finish, the motorized legs are smooth, and the controls and memory settings are easy to operate. For those seated moments, the Ergonomic Chair Pro is a great addition to this desk, and what I really like about this chair is just how much adjustability it has, because not only can you adjust the height and the tilt of the seating position, you can adjust the seat and the armrests for the fore-aft position, the height of the armrests, that's easily adjustable, the head support height, and the angle of the head support, and I think users will be easily able to dial in the perfect fit. And the seat is also immensely comfortable and supportive, and having the head and the neck support with this quality system really makes extended sessions enjoyable. Right now, FlexiSpot is running a Black Friday promotion with up to 50% off, and please use my link down below and check them out if you're looking for the perfect gaming or home office combo. Alright, Nouvolo Steck 2.0. Compared to the OG, it's larger in all dimensions. The main change here is the increased width and the increased height. The width will accommodate the more modern 3-slot thickness GPU, and the height will allow up to 4 120mm slim case fans, so 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom. And I think the increased volume, it does bring the compatibility more in line with the 2022 state of, power-hungry components. Additional changes here are more ventilation holes on the now thicker 2mm side panels. And the panels, they also latch in place with the keyhole mechanism. It's now a little bit more low profile in terms of the elevation off of the work surface. And with the added length, you've got a recessed rear I/O section here. So overall, it's a more smooth, it's a more clean design, very symmetrical. The front panel, it's solid with rounded corners, no front I/O, nothing visually distracting. The dimensions I measured, they did differ slightly from the quoted dimensions, although they are quite close. The height here is excluding the elevation off of the work surface, which these foam pads will add a tiny bit of height. On Nouvolo's site, I noticed that they have this at 12.5 liters. With their quoted dimensions, my math actually puts it at 13.3. So I'm not sure why they have it quoted that way, and with my measured dimensions, I'm at 13.6 liters. So figure that this case is closer in volume to a case like the 14.5 liter Lianli Q58 rather than the 11.1 liter Lianli A4H20. The case features a horizontal sandwich style layout with the GPU connected to the mini-itx motherboard via a PCIe 4.0 riser cable. That's an option. SFX only power supply spot next to the motherboard section on the left, and you do have the ability to mount one 2.5-inch SSD with this bracket here. For this initial look, I'm doing an air-cooled build. You do have 2 choices of rear panels. One is for up to 3-slot card, the other one for up to a 2.4-slot card. On Nouvolo's site, the air cooler clearance with the 3-slot card is quoted at 59mm, which seems a little bit conservative because I measured closer to 65mm here. If you just swap out the rear I/O panel and you adjust that divider, that leaves you with about 48mm or so of thickness clearance for your card, but you do end up with what I measured to be about 80mm worth of CPU cooler clearance, while Nouvolo quotes 72. Again, pretty conservative manufacturer spec. Real world example here, I'm running the Scythe Big Shuriken 3 with a Noctua NFA 12x25. This combo comes in at 77mm, and there is still 3mm of space between the exterior panel and the fan's rubber bumper. So in terms of the air cooler clearance, this really is quite generous. The exterior panels are 2mm thick aluminum with a steel interior chassis. Pricing comes in at around $200 US inclusive of the riser cable. At the time I'm reviewing this, it's on a promo at $195 US. Pricing on their site does indicate that it's usually around $230. And also keep in mind that you do have to pay shipping to your destination. And each extra top hat, that'll add about $25. So this is really more on the premium price level of SFF cases. You can also option on glass panels, but we won't test those until we get to the EIO and the top hats, because that's really not going to work well here. So build process, it's not too bad. It's a little bit more involved if you are swapping out that rear panel. It comes with a 3-slot rear panel. You basically have to take the case apart to swap it out. So if you do have a compatible GPU, I'd definitely do that step first. You can take off that top and bottom fan bracket and then install the fans to them first if you want. And then just leave those off until you're ready to finish things off at the very end. Originally, I did try to do the SFX power supply first, but you will want to do the motherboard first. With a modular power supply, like most SFX units are, you can simply connect the cables to the motherboard first, and then connect to the power supply as you put that into place. I put the heatsink in place first, but I did attach the fan after the motherboard was fully built in. This case has no auxiliary USB ports, just a power button at the back with a power on light, so you only have 2 I/O panel cables to connect to your motherboard. The power supply attaches via a bracket that only makes connection to the case at the top, so do expect there to be a slight amount of movement if you pivot the PSU at the bottom. It's not a big deal. Bottom of the motherboard is a bit tight, especially if you have cable headers there and you plan on using slim fans at the bottom, so just make sure all those connections are tight and not intruding into the space where the fans will spin. For this particular build, I'm using the X570 ITX from ASUS with the 3700X test CPU I usually use for case reviews. Obviously, it's not the current generation of AMD CPUs, but it is useful for consistency across past testing. And if you're still on AM4, the 5700X is actually a great choice and a great price right now. Power supply here is the Cooler Master SFX 850 watt unit. If you choose to get the case with the riser cable, it's a PCIe 4.0 one, and you'll make sure that the connection is good. Secure the cable down to the GPU side of the case, install your GPU. I'm mounting the EVGA 3080 XC3 here. It's a compact cooler for a 3080, but it does allow us to maximize the space in the SFF build. You can put the fans in on the bracket and then attach the bracket, or you can actually just install the fans at the top with the bracket in place, so up to you. I did have all these exhausting out of the case in order to pull makeup air through the side panels. One thing that concerned me a bit was how little of an airflow gap there is for the bottom fans, and I will show you the test results for that in just a second here. Once you've got the bracket back in place, you can line up these side panels and just latch them in place. They've got these keyhole slots, so a very convenient tool-less installation. And then just pop the top panel back on, which is held by clips. So a quick recap on the cooling components here. We've got the Big Shuriken 3 with an upgraded Noctua NFA 12x25 Chromax fan, and we've got 4 Noctua Slim fans doing exhaust duty. We'll compare it to the Lianli Q58 and the Fantex Shift XT that had similar setups. We'll footnote that these two comparison cases are bigger cases, with the Q58 at 14.5 liters and the medium configuration Shift XT at 15.7 liters. But the Steck in this configuration, it can take a bigger air cooler and a thicker fan at the expense of the case fan setup, and more or less they are in comparable size classes. With 4 slim case fans at 1100 RPM and 100% on the CPU cooler fan for the CPU testing, this perceived noise level, it's not exactly the same as the other cases running with 25mm fans, because these slim fans, they tend to be a little bit more high-pitched, but the measured noise level is very similar. Let's take a look at the thermals. For CPU only, the Nouvolo does trail the two comparison cases, which are actually using a smaller cooler in the IS60 EVO. So despite having less cooler clearance here, the use of 25mm case fans is critical and does really well to offset that deficit, especially if you look at the Q58 where the cooler fan is only a slim fan, but this one can fit 2 T30s and even a 25mm fan under the power supply. So I did have concerns about the two bottom fans, since it doesn't really look like there's much of an air gap here for airflow. So turning off those two fans, we can just repeat the same test, same RPM with those two top fans, a little less noise here. Interestingly, the thermals improved. I tested it again a few times, and this was indeed the correct result. And this was a little bit puzzling at first until I stared at it for a few minutes. So what's happening is, because of the position of the bottom case fans relative to the heatsink fan, this exhausted hot air doesn't have a clear path to leave the vicinity of the case, so it just bounces off your desk, whatever surface it's on, and it just gets sucked back into the cooler fan. So we're recycling hot air through the cooler, so that does make a difference here. Now, if you just have two top fans, that's getting readily dispersed out into the open, doesn't get back in. The reintake, it's pretty minimal here, so in fact, less is more here. Moving over to the combined benchmarks for 1440p gaming with Red Dead 2. Cooler fans dialed down to 80% here. Seeing a similar phenomenon here, of course, the GPU temps, they're a little bit higher with just two fans, but a much larger gap for CPU temps. And the reason for that is that instead of the CPU's heat getting piped into the cooler, now you have both the CPU's heat and the GPU's exhaust that gets placed into that intake path. The Q58 is better overall with much better GPU temps. I'd say it's comparable. The Nouvolo is comparable to the Medium Shift XT. And the case fans are pretty important, as you can see, because the Shift XT configuration shows us just how dismal no case fans is. So all in all, this is a very usable case. I would be a little bit more cautious about throwing a super hot GPU in there. Of course, with a 3-slot GPU cooler, you'll definitely see better results as well, so do keep that in mind. Okay, so pros of this case. You really don't have to worry too much about air cooler clearance. In fact, this is one of the more generous sandwich style cases in that regard. So in 2.4 slot configuration, you can just go stock knock to a L12S and call it a day, right? It's pretty simple. The design language here, it's consistent, it's very elegant. I like how it's symmetrical looking. That rear I/O inset really does add a little bit of volume, but it completely ties the look together from the side. In terms of the build quality, the exterior aluminum panels are well machined. You've got good finish quality. The interior steel frame was a little bit mixed in my opinion. When I was taking apart and reassembling it, there was a little bit more flaked off paint and metal shavings than I would have liked. Some of the panels, they don't line up consistently, but overall I'd say the build quality on this is above average. Cons, I think the fan layout is super odd, which kind of takes away from the thermal performance that's possible here. I mean, this iteration, it does absolutely add this case fan capability, but if you think about it, this whole ensemble, it could have been shifted down 15 millimeters, right? You could just shift the motherboard down 15 millimeters, shift the power supply down 15 millimeters, and then you'll allow the use of two 25 millimeters or even two 30 millimeter fans up at the top. And I think at this price level, users are not really going to balk at an expensive fan like the Fantex T30, so why not, design the case around that, spend your 30 millimeters or so of fan space for a fan like that. Although it's limited in terms of the cooler capability, a case like the T1 V2, it does manage to allow enough space for those fans, and they are really quite effective. Another option is to raise the case off the bottom a little bit more. Not that I would prefer that, because I know that part of the change here versus the V1 was that lower profile, but short of reconfiguring the fan spacing, that's the other way to make it work a little bit better. The ability to customize the case to a 3-slot or 2.4 slot GPU is nice, but I wonder if there was a simpler and cheaper solution than having to swap out an entire rear panel, and even then there's still quite a bit of work on behalf of the user to reconfigure it. So based on this first look here, well, who's this case for? Well, for your air coolers out there that want a good looking, easy to build in sandwich style case with good compatibility, even if you've got a 3-slot cards, by my measurements, you can still run the IS60 EVO, and that's a great cooler if you want to cool even a Ryzen 7 level CPU. You can do a 2.4 slot card and have even more air cooling, and you'd be using a smaller GPU there or so. One thing is, in this volume segment, you're getting really close to the NK-M1, for which the next evolution is inbound. Also, you've got the upcoming C4 SFX. Neither of those are sandwich style cases, but they will feature much more robust air cooling solutions. Who is in this case for? Well, Liquid coolers. I will be testing the top hat still, but my logic here is that if you are liquid cooling, the A4H2O does 25mm fans with an AIO without the need for any top hats. It's also much more affordable. I think the build quality there is comparable, and that's best in class, and that's 11.1 liters, right? The other user I don't think this is for is if you're a user that needs front IO, because it absolutely has 0. Now, that's a design choice, but to power this on, you're going to need to reach to the back. Everything is in the back, so I think that's going to be a limitation for some users. Overall, this is a case worth serious consideration. The cost does make this a more difficult decision, since at this point you're really up against some serious competition. There's also definitely some room for improvement with the fan layout, but hey, if this is the look you want, there's not too many SFF cases quite like this in terms of how clean and streamlined and symmetrical it looks. Thanks for checking this one out for me. I do have the build components listed down below for reference. Please give a like and subscribe. I will continue to explore this case along with the top hats and liquid cooling. And a big thanks for watching today.